All right, I want to welcome everybody to our Monday and Thursday at 1 p.m. Central shows that we've been doing lately. We've had a series of experts to come on talking about their areas of expertise and how they're impacted on our daily lives dealing with the pandemic. And I want to welcome my good friend Carol Williams with Williams Immigration. She has offices in the Atlanta area as well as South Florida. Hey, Carol, how are you today?
Hey, how are you doing? It's good to see you.
You too, you too. Carol and I have known each other for a few years now and are involved in a whole bunch of attorney online groups, and we get to see each other all the time. And I'm so glad that she's going to take a few minutes with us today. And we're going to talk about immigration laws and how the pandemic is impacting those laws and what people can do. And that's what Carol specializes in. But before we jump into it, Carol, tell us a little bit about your background and your practice.
So, I have been practicing immigration for just over 20 years now. It's bizarre to me that it has been so long, but I absolutely love what I do. Um, and I have had my own firm now for 7 years. And I help companies hire foreign nationals, make sure they're on the right visa when they come in, help them with all the compliance work. And then I keep families together one green card at a time. And I am now based out of sunny South Florida, which is quite nice being near the ocean.
Well, I know that you and several of our other attorney friends do similar work, and it's even if we weren't in the pandemic, just given, and we won't get too far into the political world, your world has been, or the immigration world has been turned upside down with the laws over the last few years. And just when you're about to get used to how all those laws work, now we got to deal with the pandemic and even more changes.
Of course.
So I know it keeps you on your toes. Um, Carol, there's so many things that are in the news, at least for those of us who don't do this type of work, that it's very confusing about how to keep up with even the very basics of how and what is going on in immigration laws as a whole. So I kind of want to throw to you a question. It's kind of an open-ended question in that now that we're fast approaching almost 2 months into this pandemic and different states have different levels of quarantine, shelter in place, stay in place, et cetera, the federal laws that we're going to talk about, there's been some changes over the last couple of months, or at least attitude changes. What are you seeing from your clients? What are you seeing or hearing from your colleagues out there that are current issues that people need to be aware of who are dealing with these laws?
Sure. So, one of the things I'm seeing a lot, obviously. One of the things I'm seeing when a lot of the stay-at-home orders took effect, and they kind of had this rolling out slowly across the country. So it wasn't just the country shut down overnight. It was kind of county by county, state by state.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of what I saw and a lot of calls that I was fielding were from people that were here on a temporary basis. They may have honestly just come in for vacation. And now there are travel restrictions worldwide. There are travel restrictions in the US. There are stay at home orders that are coming down on a rolling basis. And their major question was, what do I do? I'm supposed to leave by the beginning of April. I'm supposed to leave by the end of March. I can't leave. My flight's been canceled. There's a stay at home order. What should I do? So I got a ton of those phone calls. And honestly, we just had to take them on a case by case basis. Um, but at the end of the day, my advice to people was you have to do what you feel safe doing when it comes to you and your family's health. So for some people, that was indeed going back home to countries where they were citizens and they were maybe a month or so ahead of us with this pandemic. They wanted to be closer to their loved ones. Some people decided to stay here in the U.S. And I will say the immigration service has been wonderful about giving us some guidance how they're handling it. They too are handling it on a case by case basis. But by and large, we've really been sort of working with them very well. And them really, really understanding that some people just don't feel comfortable going home right now.
Well, there's been, at least we know of with China in the public eye, there's been a travel ban dealing with China.
Mhm.
Are there other countries that you're aware of that are currently there are bans either established in the United States dealing with those countries, or other countries have created a ban for people who are in the States from traveling there?
So, our northern and southern border is essentially closed, and that's our border with Canada and Mexico. They're essentially closed. The three governments got together. And so all leisure travel has been stopped coming in and out of the US and in and out of Canada and in and out of Mexico. If you're traveling for work purposes, you can get in, but it is still recommended that if you can work remotely, please do so because we all have these stay-at-home orders in place and we don't want to spread the virus across the border. Um, Folks that are integral in our nation's supply chain, when it comes to food and commerce, they are still crossing the border. But by and large, our borders are pretty much closed. Other countries across the world have different travel bans. Some countries have limited folks that are not their citizens from coming in. And I think those travel bans look very similar to the ones that we have with Mexico and Canada. So it's really in terms of the travel restrictions, a country by country view. I get a notice probably every 2 to 3 days with the updates, really um, with all the different countries that we're while I certainly help people come into the U.S. because this is such a big issue. We've all kind of banded together and we're all sharing information. Immigration attorneys across the country really sharing information about what they're hearing, not only from their clients but what they're hearing from other counsel in other countries about who can travel. And that is really helping all of us worldwide advise our clients in terms of who they can go home with, who they can't. Because if you have someone that's let's say an Italian citizen, but they're married to a US citizen, the Italian citizen can go home, but can the US citizen go with them? And vice versa into the US. So these are things that we're all really, sort of combining our brain power to make happen and to get people in a place where they feel comfortable. And I think for me, it's really about getting people to a space and to a physical location where they feel comfortable.
Well,
Because there's a lot of anxiety right now.
that's great having a network of other attorneys to be able to share such information. Let's kind of shift focus for just a few minutes, and I want to talk about those individuals who are not United States citizens, but they're working on their different paperwork depending on their situation. With the pandemic, has there been a slowdown or has that been affected on people who ordinarily, if we weren't in a pandemic, would be processing their papers at a certain period of time? What's going on with that world right now?
So processing across the board has definitely slowed down, but the Immigration Service is still open. They are still accepting applications, and applications are still being processed. I'm still getting approval notices. Um, so, so yes, immigration is still working, but they have certainly slowed down. Their employees, are still under shelter at home orders. Some of them are in fact working from home. Last week, we had a proclamation from the White House that there's a 60-day travel restriction for individuals trying to get into the United States. So there is a slowdown there that we're seeing as well. There are some people that are exempt from that, but that will slow down the process as well. But that said, the proclamation sort of sits on top of the fact that our consulates overseas were already closed. So while there is, while, you know, so while there's now a travel restriction coming down from the White House, the State Department had already closed many, if not all, of the consulates overseas. So those applications already weren't being processed. So we've got all these different layers of restrictions, and really what it comes down to is many applications, if you are inside the US, are still being processed. If you are outside the US, and you need to go into a consulate, those consulates just right now they're closed. So those consulates will open, you know, based on the country specific conditions. So we're just, so again, it's just a matter of really sharing information, and being patient. You know, we've never seen something like this before. So we're bobbing and weaving, and we're being as flexible and as patient as we can.
Well, Carol, what about an individual who's here on a temporary work visa and that visa expires during this pandemic? How's that individual supposed to deal with that at this point?
Sure. If someone's already here in the US, they already have work authorization, it's going to expire, we can file to extend that work authorization here in the US. If they are here in the US, the Immigration Service is open for business, they are doing business, they're processing applications. I would say contact someone sooner rather than later, so that we can assess your situation and get your application in with the Immigration Service as soon as possible, because processing is just taking a little bit longer than it normally would. But definitely, if they're here in the US, they are currently working, we can file to extend that work authorization in most cases.
And speaking of contacting, how can people get in touch with you at Williams Immigration?
Sure. So if they want to give our office a call, they are welcome to do that. The office number is 954-903-1337. And we are on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook with the handle at USA Visa Guru.
And I put the link to your website in the show notes here.
Perfect.
Carol, we're in the middle of this pandemic. We don't know how long certain guidelines and quarantines and restrictions are going to be in place. Has there been a change in the immigration with the immigration laws and how you're dealing with your clients about anything in particular I guess what's come to the forefront is what I'm asking. What are you seeing? What's being asked of you? What are you having to reach out to your network to find out that something that's different, something that's new because of the pandemic that you hadn't had to deal with in the past? And you had mentioned some of the travel restrictions, so I suspect that's part of it.
I think just the massive travel restrictions, are fairly unprecedented. We certainly dealt with a travel ban, um, but these are really just sort of unprecedented travel restrictions. I think something that has come back, to the forefront are what happens when employers, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, are looking to reduce their employee numbers, cut salary across the board in order to preserve their employee numbers, or putting people on in a furlough status. At the beginning of my career, when the tech market, took a huge hit, we did a lot of that kind of counseling for employers, and I'm seeing a lot more of that now, to the extent that I haven't seen since the tech market, took such a dip. So there's certainly a resurgence of that kind of counseling, with my clients, who are businesses. In terms of families, a lot more uncertainty. They are certainly concerned about losing wages and what happens if someone who is undocumented is picked up, what does that all mean with the overlay of potentially having to go into a detention facility, or just losing their job, or whether or not their applications are still going to be processed.
Sure.
The anxiety is new, like the level of anxiety of my clients.
I'm sure there's always anxiety, but it's probably new anxiety.
Yeah.
What about a person who is here on a work visa, and one of the requirements for them being in the United States is having active work, but they've now been put on a furlough, and they don't know if the furlough, for those of you who don't know, just that's a temporary layoff from employment, and has a little bit different meanings, different parts of the country, different states, and it could be different lengths of time. How does a person who is here on a work visa but has been furloughed, and they're being told by the employer, we don't know if it's going to be for 4 weeks or 8 weeks or 12 weeks, and they're starting to get a little anxious, and they
Sure.
come to you, and how are you guys dealing with that issue?
So it depends, and I'm not at all going to go into the weeds. It
Sure,
depends on
sure.
the type of work visa they have.
Mhm.
Some work visas will allow a furlough, others will not.
Okay.
So there's one in particular where you cannot bring that employee below a certain minimum wage.
Mhm.
And so those folks are either kept at at the proper wage,
Mhm.
or they are terminated, but there is no furlough for them. So that's a really case by case basis.
Mhm.
There are some visa categories where you can say, okay, we're going to across the board cut 10%, and that's okay. But for employers that have foreign nationals on staff who are on work visas, they really, really need to reach out to an immigration lawyer to find out the consequences and the ramifications and what they can and cannot do based on the type of work visa that someone's on. And that's where it gets very, very tricky.
What about, and thank you for that explanation. I know that with any of these things, it does sound like a case by case analysis. That's why it's so hard to just give blanket responses. But that's the way the law works. I mean,
It is.
it's the law is there, but then there's all these exceptions, or
Right.
there's all these qualifiers. And thank you for sharing some of your expertise in this. And for those of you who don't know Carol, for the type of work that she does, it can be very stressful. But she has the very best outlook on life. You guys really should find her on social media and see what she's all about. And I really love some of this that we're talking about here, Carol. What are some other hot button, hot topics right now that you're seeing either in the national news or that's being talked amongst your colleagues? What are some things people need to be aware of that because we're in the pandemic, and they're dealing with immigration issues, they need to be aware of these things?
I think one of the biggest things that employers need to be aware of is that all applications that were eligible for expedited processing are not eligible for expedited processing right now. They have temporarily suspended all expedited processing. So, sometimes an employer would come to me and they say, all right, I need this person in a month. Can we make that happen? Yes, we can. We can ask for expedited processing. That's not going to happen right now. So applications are just going to take longer. Um, I think that's a huge situation that employers are currently dealing with. Um, I think on the family side of the house, um, there's a lot coming out of the White House, um, and we have a new proclamation in place. Families are worried that they're not going to be reunited, that their loved one who's outside of the US is not going to be allowed back in. Um, and I think for those families, it currently, I think it's a waiting game. We are currently looking at a 60-day travel restriction. It could be more. We don't know yet. And it's really about, honestly, I think managing the anxiety. it is temporary. We will get back to a place where people can come in, and that is really tied to the pandemic at the moment.
Carol, is there a place where people can go to get updated news as it comes out? Or is it you just are waiting for either the White House or different departments to issue whatever the newest rules and regulations are given the pandemic?
So this is the hard part and sort of the complex part about immigration. If this were dealing with taxes, you have one stop shop. You can go to irs.gov and get, all the information that you need. Immigration is touched by so many different federal agencies. It's touched by the Department of Labor, Department of State, US Citizenship and Immigration Services, Customs and Border Protection, the White House, and Department of Homeland Security. So,
Like
yeah.
7 places.
So that is there. So there's not really one stop shopping in order to get all of this information. I certainly send out a periodic newsletter to my clients and, to people that have asked to be on it. I'm more than happy to add people to it. But it's really this compilation of information that I get from the Department of Labor, Department of State that, oversees the consulates, USCIS, it's just that's one of the things that makes immigration so complex. And so that's why people typically tend to rely on whatever their favorite news outlet is, because these news outlets understand that they have to compile information from all these different places. So unlike the IRS, it's not just, hey, I'm going to go to immigration.gov and get all the information I need. It doesn't really exist.
Well, that's it, and that keeps you on your toes, I'm sure, having to monitor a whole bunch of different places to get your information. It sounds like being prepared and doing your paperwork well ahead of any expected deadlines,
Mm-hmm.
being patient with the process, and staying on top of whatever the current news, rules, procedures that may be coming out in the upcoming days or weeks. That's the best way for a person to hopefully lower some level of anxiety. Other than getting in touch with Carol Williams at Williams Immigration, are there any other things that people should be thinking about?
I think people can watch the news outlets, but I caution people, and I say this to my clients all the time: don't Google. Do yourself a favor and don't Google. You will spin yourself into more anxiety oftentimes than when you started. If you have a question that keeps you up in the middle of the night, that, prevents you from focusing during the day, that is something that is truly on your mind that you need an answer to. Whether or not you like the resulting answer is, I can't speak to that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's really when I think people need to reach out to a professional, reach out to an immigration attorney and ask the question and get good advice. That will cut down on so much of the anxiety. I have fielded so many phone calls since this pandemic started that really somebody just needed to talk. They just needed to stop Googling. They needed a good source of information because immigration information isn't warehoused in one location on the web. So when you start Googling, it is really just a very giant, long, deep hole that you can wind yourself in.
Well, it goes from that's such great advice, and it's so hard for people to understand that Google does not replace a law degree or a
Right.
medical degree or whatever else your issue may be.
I mean, I'm the first to admit I love me some Google. I love Googling. Like I've definitely gone to the doctor and I'm like, full disclosure, I consulted Dr. Google first but here I am with 4 questions, you know? And my doctor laughs at me. She's like, I know, Carol, I know. But I think Google is a great starting place. I do not think it is a great ending place when you are looking for legal advice for any matter.
Well, once again, Carol, how can people get in touch with you at Williams Immigration?
Sure, if they want to give me a phone, if they want to give me a call, they are welcome to do that at 954-903-1337, or they can find me on social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And my handle is at USA Visa Guru.
Guys, you've heard it from one of the best. Carol Williams with Williams Immigration is giving us an update and things to be thinking about dealing with immigration laws and the immigration practice that her firm handles, particularly during this time of the pandemic. And as we try to do on Mondays and Thursdays at 1 p.m. Central, coming to you different topics, different areas of our life and how they're impacted by the pandemic. And all of these videos, including the one today with Carol, are housed on our YouTube channel as well as on our Facebook page and our website. Carol, thank you again for your time and your expertise today. And it's always good to see and hear from you.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. I love linking up with you, Bernard.
Absolutely. I hope to see you again soon, Carol.
Absolutely.
And guys, that'll conclude us for now. And catch us back on Thursday at 1 p.m. Y'all have a great rest of your afternoon. Bye.
All right. Bye.